Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in Senior English B. We now turn in your hymnals the My Perspective text to page 553. We're going to introduce ourselves to the great William Wordsworth. Notice your dates at the top of the page, 1770 to 1850. Let's just read now and introduce ourselves to Wordsworth as we prepare for our study of Tintern Abbey and other titles as well that will be either in our text or outside of our text as enhancement lectures. The text says, writing poetry may seem like a quiet, meditative activity, a matter of words, not deeds, hardly the scene of upheavals and crisis. Yet in 1798, you want to circle that date, in 1798, when Wordsworth and his friend Samuel Taylor Coleridge published the first edition of Lyrical Ballots, you want to circle the name Coleridge, we'll be studying the Rime of the Ancient Mariner together. When they published together the first edition of Lyrical Ballots, you want to definitely circle that one, a revolution shook the world of poetry. Together, Wordsworth and Coleridge rejected all the traditional assumptions about the proper style, words, and subject matter for a poem. Gone were the flowery language, the wittily crafted figures of speech, the effusive praise, and the tragic complaints that had defined poetry in the past. In their place, Wordsworth offered an intensified presentation of ordinary life and nature using common language. That you want to underline, the use of common language, hypercritical. Wordsworth's Revolution took literature in a dramatic new direction, building the movement known as Romanticism. Let's make sure we squared that in our hymnals. Wordsworth's Revolution was rooted in his early love for nature. Born in the beautiful Lake District of England, Wordsworth spent his youth roaming the countryside, and in later years he found peace and reassurance there as well. After graduating from Cambridge University in 1787, Wordsworth traveled through Europe, spending considerable time in France. There he embraced the ideals of the newborn French Revolution, ideals that stressed social justice and individual rights. Wordsworth's involvement with the revolution ended abruptly, however, when he had to return home. 2 months later, in 1793, an important date, England declared war on France and the revolution became increasingly violent. His dreams of liberty had been betrayed. In 1798, Wordsworth published Lyrical Ballots with Coleridge. It's a huge date, 1798, two years before 1800. With the publication of this work, Wordsworth translated his revolutionary hopes from politics to literature. Eventually, Wordsworth's radical new approach to poetry gained acceptance. Meanwhile, a new generation of romantics, more radical than Wordsworth and Coleridge, arose. We call those the second generation of romantic poets. We'll talk about that in other lectures. Wordsworth's position was secure, however. We remember him as the father of English Romanticism. All right? Now let's get some quick background for two of the titles that we'll be studying later. First, Tintern Abbey, or Lines Composed a Few Miles Above Tintern Abbey. The poem was written in 1798 during Wordsworth's second visit to the valley of the River Wye and the ruins of Tintern Abbey, once a great medieval church in Wales. Wordsworth had passed through the region alone 5 years earlier. This time he brought his sister Dorothy along to share the experience, and we'll have much more to say about Tintern Abbey later. We also are going to look at a small cutting from the Prelude. In 1790, Wordsworth witnessed the early optimistic days of the French Revolution. The country seemed on the verge of achieving true freedom from outdated, oppressive feudal institutions. Caught up in the revolutionary fervor, Wordsworth felt he was seeing, quote, France standing on the top of golden hours, end quote. The war between England and France, declared in 1793, and the violent turn taken by the French Revolution known as the Reign of Terror, where, you know, the guillotine and the chopping off of heads and all of that, 1793 to 1794, dashed Wordsworth's hopes. Now we're going to turn to our study of Wordsworth first with his classic sonnet, The World is Too Much With Us. We'll use that poem as a way to try to understand Wordsworth's agenda, his romantic agenda, and you'll find all of that information at LearnStrong.net in the Senior B folder. Thank you. Let's study our Wordsworth.